Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From the Royal York Hotel in downtown Toronto, welcome to the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you joining us by webcast or podcast, welcome to the meeting. Before I jump into this, I'd like to acknowledge a special guest in our midst. We have Leslie Weir, Canada's National Librarian and Archivist, head of the Library and Archives Canada, sitting here with us. I've been looking forward to this event for some time. You may know Vickery for her brave and principled stand last October in defense of free speech and against cancel culture. That was only the latest instance in a long career of repeatedly standing up in defense of intellectual freedom. And she's not alone. For more than a century, libraries and librarians have held the line against censorship. A library is a physical monument of free inquiry. It is a forum of open discourse, a place to listen to, respect, and learn from each other's perspectives. That's why we've seen cities across Canada, from Calgary to Ottawa to Halifax, investing hundreds of millions to open stunning new central libraries. And if you'll allow me to draw a parallel, the Empire Club and the Toronto Public Library share a few of the same founding principles. Back in 1903, the year this club began, was the same year that the Toronto Public Library got a transformational grant from the Carnegie Foundation. They used it to open a central branch in Yorkville, not too far from here. Back then, the public library movement had to fight for every new branch and every new book. Fast forward 100 years, and today the city's public library system is beloved by Torontonians. The Toronto Public Library holds more than 10 million items spanning 40 languages. A few years ago, the Toronto Public Library opened their 100th branch at the Scarborough Civic Centre. And in the past century, both the Public Library and the Empire Club of Canada have proudly hosted leaders and thinkers of all stripe without fear or favor. And it is in that spirit that I am proud to introduce Vickery. She is the City Librarian of the Toronto Public Library and the Chair of the Urban Literary Library Council and a proud champion of free speech. Please welcome her to the stage.
That's not a good start. Anyway, well, thank you so much, everyone. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here at the Empire Club and with this opportunity to speak to all of you on what I think is a really, really important topic for us to all think about, and that's debate and the complexity of debate in today's world. I recently came across an annual report published by the Toronto Public Library entitled Reading in Toronto, 1942. And in the document, written in the midst of a war being fought to protect our democratic freedoms, TPL's then Chief Librarian Charles R. Sanderson shared his view with members of the Toronto Library Board on the essential and enduring role of public libraries in supporting a democratic society. So he wrote, "In our annual report of a year ago, we presented a statement of our faith in the public library as the pivot of democracy. That faith remains, and it can be restated by saying that if a community is permitted to think, and democracy rests its case on this, it must have books. And books mean libraries, and libraries for most of us mean public libraries. We still believe with full sincerity that the job of book provision for the fundamental purpose of making it possible for ourselves to think with intellectual honesty, to think with informed minds, remains the primary job of public libraries, even in wartime. Without this, the rest is futility." So much has changed since that statement in 1942. In the fast-paced world of the 21st century, intellectual freedom has become much more complex. While books are still essential, today there are so many other ways to access and share information. The internet offers a wealth of information. The media, it delivers news as it happens. And publishers and producers of content to continue to proliferate, and algorithms are segmenting and filtering people's online experiences. And with this increasing complexity, more and more challenges to our democratic values are appearing throughout the world. In this digital age, public libraries continue to have core capabilities and responsibilities to respond to intellectual freedom challenges. And we as libraries are well positioned to provide leadership in our communities and beyond, because public libraries help democratize the modern world, supporting literacy and a literate population and access to a diversity of information and ideas. To walk into a public space, and if you think about this, if you walk into a public space, to freely attend a program, use a computer, use the study and lounge space, borrow a book, or conduct research on absolutely any topic with the help of professional staff, this has to be one of the most significant acts of intellectual freedom imaginable. So today, nearly 80 years later, even though so much has changed, Mr. Sanderson's words are more relevant than ever. Certainly the role of the public library has grown and evolved over the past 8 decades, and we are no longer just places for quiet study and reading, but rather vital community hubs dedicated to empowering citizens to thrive in today's changing world. We provide access to the latest technologies, from digital innovation hubs with virtual reality headsets to studio spaces where there is e-learning and self-directed courses, and there's STEM programming for kids. And we connect people with diverse cultural and leisure experiences, from Indigenous programs to our sewing fabrication studios. And throughout this transformation, throughout all of these years, there is one thing that has not changed, and that is our focus on our core values and our fundamental commitment as outlined in the library's mission statement: to provide, preserve, and promote universal access to a broad range of human knowledge, experience, information, and ideas in a welcoming and supportive environment. As a public institution and as a government body, one of our core responsibilities is to uphold the fundamental freedoms of thought, belief, opinion, and expression as enshrined in our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And an important part of that commitment is making our spaces available for rent on an equitable basis to any individual or group in our community based on the purpose of the booking. And so, last fall, this was a subject of much discussion in the City of Toronto and indeed across the country, prompted by a third-party room rental event at the library, which was organized by a group called Radical Feminists Unite. And this event featured the controversial speaker, Megan Murphy. The stated purpose of the event was titled Gender Identity: What Does It Mean for Society, the Law, and Women?, and was to have an educational and open discussion on the concept of gender identity and its legislation ramifications on women across Canada. So, some of you may have heard, I'm sure some of you in this room have, that the issue generated a lot of discussion on, a lot of it was on social media, and a lot of that discussion on social media was negative, predominantly negative. And then there were opinion articles in mainstream newspapers, and most spoke out in support of TPL's position, as did others such as the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and the Centre for Free Expression at Ryerson University. And then, of course, there were others who challenged the decision, including our mayor here in Toronto, some other politicians, representatives from organizations such as Pride TO, and parents of transgender children, all of whom were vocal in their opposition to the decision. But what I think is really important to understand about all of this wasn't about one event or opinion or viewpoint. This is a larger, much more fundamental issue that gets to the very heart of what the library is and what it is that we do. The public library was founded on the social justice principles of equity and inclusion, and these are values that guide us in the work that we do each and every day. And what was so surprising to me in this whole debate, this whole controversy, was that we found ourselves defending free speech, and then those that were opposing the library's decision said we were undermining the rights of the transgender community, undermining their equity and inclusion rights, and putting them at what is a very vulnerable community at risk of greater discrimination and even physical harm. So the juxtaposition of free speech and the social justice principles of equity and inclusion became a significant part of the conversation and the debate. But as I pointed out in my response to this criticism, freedom of speech and equity and inclusion principles are not at odds with each other. In fact, they're mutually reinforcing principles that are foundational not only to public library service, but more importantly, to our very democracies. Ensuring minority and marginalized voices are heard often leads to greater understanding and tolerance. Pushing controversial and unpopular ideas into the shadows means there's no opportunity for debate or discussion. Racialized communities, the LGBTQ community, and other equity-seeking groups have been successful precisely because their voices have been protected. Voices all too often shut down have been heard in the midst of powerful opposition. And with this, public perspectives moderate, laws are revised, and change happens for the betterment of all. So, given all of this, why did the Megan Murphy booking at the library result in so much controversy? Well, first and foremost, it's important to recognize that the very core of this, it's an extremely emotional issue, and understandably so. The transgender community is incredibly vulnerable, suffering huge discrimination and violence in their daily lives. Many members of this community passionately and really bravely shared their real-life experiences through presentations to our library board and in letters and emails to the library. And the hurt and anger I heard was real. What's interesting, however, is that amidst all of the hurt and anger is that there was a really important discussion, a conversation that emerged about the discrimination faced by people in the transgender community. And the controversy and discussion brought to light important, broader issues that need to be addressed as things such as poverty, isolation, unemployment, and of course, safety. And we're responding to this at the library by developing a service plan in consultation with the community to address our public spaces, collections, our programs and our collaborations, our staff training, and our policy development. We all need to think about this, and this is a really important part of my message here today, is that we all need to think about this, how we can work together to fight transphobia and homophobia, individually, in our workplaces and boardrooms, and through our social networks. We need to demonstrate cultural humility, highlighting our desire to learn from others and their lived experiences. And part of the way we can do that is by providing forums to discuss and debate the issues, developing programs to explore and address the issues. These are the paths to social equity and inclusion, and this is what drives social change for the betterment of all. Community activism is based on free speech, and so it's so critical for us to protect free speech so that community activism can thrive. We're living through what some people call a cancel culture, and Mike mentioned that in his opening remarks. And that's something that Barack Obama recently spoke about as well, where there's little to no tolerance for opinions that are outside the mainstream, especially if a group feels that they're threatened or hurt by the views expressed. And some people claim a view should not be tolerated if it makes them feel unsafe. And I can tell you, I certainly heard that a lot during this whole controversy with the Megan Murphy event. People asked me, how can the library offer a welcoming and supportive environment if it allows people like Megan Murphy to speak at the library? Well, the answer is that reflecting diversity in terms of the people, the ideas, the books, the programs, and yes, even the room bookings, is foundational to creating a welcoming and supportive environment at the library. And this will include content that will be offensive to some. We welcome everyone into our spaces without judgment. And I can't say that strongly enough. We welcome everyone into our spaces without judgment. When people come to the library, we support them to pursue their interests and make sure that they are not discriminated or harassed in their pursuits or in any part of the process. Another aspect to this, and I think this is also worth mentioning, and it was very surprising to me, the number of people who contacted me either through email or through notes or talking to me individually, telling me that they supported my decision, but they didn't feel they could share their views because of reprisal from friends or colleagues or on social media. And I think this provides yet another telling perspective on the state of free speech in today's world. Some of you may not realize this, but historically, libraries have faced its greatest challenges to intellectual freedom by people asking us to remove books from our collections. And this still happens, of course. However, increasingly, libraries throughout North America are facing challenges to program content and third-party room bookings. And in the US, for instance, the state legislatures of Missouri and Tennessee are both in this situation where they have proposed legislation before them to establish parental review boards that would have the authority to remove content and programs they feel are offensive or inappropriate for children. And these pieces of legislation are really targeted at LGBTQ content. So this is not just happening in libraries, of course. We see these controversies in the media, in government, and on university campuses as well, which is reflective of a growing intolerance of different points of view for perspectives and opinions which are unpopular or not part of the mainstream. And we have to understand that this represents a tremendous challenge to our democratic freedoms. Today, we are seeing more and more challenges to these freedoms as well as increasing divides in our city and in our world, politically, economically, socially, and more. And this is a time when we must all stand up even stronger than ever before for fundamental values that support free speech. And so what that means at the library is continuing to provide equal access to spaces and forums where people are encouraged to come together to discuss and civilly debate important and sometimes controversial topics and different points of views. And I can tell you from personal experience, this can be a deeply uncomfortable situation to be in when you're defending the rights of individuals whose views some may consider hurtful or offensive. But believing in the freedom of speech means believing in freedom of expression for all. What libraries offer through our collections, services, programs, and our spaces is a chance to engage in a meaningful way with our fellow citizens, to hear them and to make small steps towards understanding them even when, and particularly when, we vehemently disagree with something they believe. The late Elliot Shellcrott, who was the longtime head of the Philadelphia Public Library, once said that democracy depends on an informed population. And where can people get that information that they need? At the library. And so how do we do this at the library? Well, it's by offering the chance for people to experience what living in an intellectually free society means, by accessing books with controversial ideas and unpopular opinions, by sitting in a room with hundreds of people debating and discussing contentious issues, and by taking a workshop on how to run for political office, even if you don't have any public service experience or you're not born into the right family, by listening to a podcast and talking to our friends and family about a new point of view or perspective that was introduced. That's what is meant for public libraries to do. We open up doors, we open up people's minds to new avenues and opportunities for discussion that connect us to each other and our communities and teach each other to listen to each other. And so how did all this play out with the third-party rental featuring Megan Murphy? Well, there were a few hundred protesters outside the Palmerston Branch Library here in Toronto on October 29th. And they showed up and voiced their opposition to the event and exercised their right to free speech. Megan Murphy had a police escort into the Palmerston branch to deliver her presentation to about 100 attendees, most of whom were women. So Ms. Murphy and the attendees were all able to exercise their right to free speech and expression as well. And with the help of 40 to 50 police officers and a few staff, the evening concluded without any incident. Last year, we brought to life the library's commitment to opening doors and new avenues to discussion with the launch of what has become a hugely popular series for us. They're public programs called On Civil Society. And this series of events and debates run by the library across many of our 100 branches is expressly designed to open up difficult conversations, explore what comprises a civil society in today's climate, and how disagreeing civilly with each other is a lesson we all need to discuss, and in some cases, it's something we need to relearn. By welcoming and creating space for different perspectives to be shared and debated, public libraries provide vital opportunities to everyone to engage in civic discourse. And this is particularly important for marginalized groups whose voices are all too often silenced. More discussion can lead to a better understanding and greater acceptance and tolerance in society. For more than a century, public libraries have been a democratizing force in the world, supporting a civil society and helping us to learn about the world in all of its incredible complexities. Today, with so many challenges to freedom of speech in libraries, political and government forums, on university campuses, it's imperative that we continue to have open, uncensored discourse and listen to, respect, and learn from each other's perspectives. Now is the time when we must be open to civil debate on difficult topics. Now is the time when we must address equity and inclusion for all by accepting differences without judgment. And now is a time when we need to hear more voices, not fewer voices. And that's what public libraries ensure we do each and every day when we open our doors and welcome everyone into our public spaces. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
We do have an opportunity to take a few questions. Maybe I'll kick it off.
Okay.
I mean, what you say just strikes me as so intuitive and makes so much sense. But at the same time, I think in a world where identity politics is only more predominant, it seems that often free speech is sort of the piece that goes through the meat grinder and all that. And you talk about foundational elements like free speech, but you know, in a world where identity politics and I guess so there's an outrage mob each day kind of around one issue or another, you know, what do we need to do as society, as individuals to kind of make sure that free speech continues to be recognized for the important value it is?
Well, you know, I think we need to be able to stand up and speak openly about our various opinions, and whether you agree with someone or not, how important it is to allow others to express their opinions and to listen to each other respectfully. You know, I think that we see on social media, but we also see on, you know, televisions and through the news reports every day with politicians kind of saying outrageous things and yelling at each other. And I think that this whole idea of listening to each other and debating things civilly, you know, there was a time when having debating clubs was a really valuable thing that people thought of, and how important it was. You know, you had two different sides and they come together and they debate two sides of a particular issue. Those are important parts of our democratic society. And I think, you know, when we see challenges to these issues, I think we have to go back and think about what are our core values here? What is this really all about? And I think that we have to be willing to be able to speak up. And as I said, I was so surprised when I was contacted by so many people who didn't feel, some of them were my own staff, who didn't feel they could speak up in support of the decision because of the you know, friends or colleagues or others would be provide some negative comments to them.
Right. And the third party booking, I mean, that's really what this was about.
Yes,
you know, it was interesting.
it was.
And you know, what strikes me as odd in looking at the whole story and how it played out was this was actually a matter of some debate. I mean, there was legislation that had recently been through Ottawa dealing with the issue of gender identity.
Yes.
So you would consider that these are the type of issues we should be talking about.
Right.
But when I guess when it's on the other side of the ledger is a marginalized community,
Yes.
it makes it trickier. So, you know, how did you feel sort of being on the side of free speech, but when on the other side of the table, as some people were trying to frame that discussion, there was a group that really is having, you know, a tough time and marginalized in society.
Absolutely, and that's why I think our response to this has to be that we have to work really hard, all of us, to fight transphobia and homophobia. That's the way we need to respond to these situations, and this is the way we can lead to equity and inclusion for these equity-seeking groups, these groups that are traditionally discriminated against. And it's the way racialized communities and others have been able to achieve success is by community activism, which is based on free speech, and people standing up for important values such as equity. But you have to be able to talk about it. And if you shut it down, then you're just pushing all of that into the shadows and you're censoring the conversation, and there isn't the debate, there isn't the discussion, and it doesn't lead to greater tolerance and understanding. And as a result, laws are changed and people moderate their views, and it's all for the betterment of everyone.
Right. I think we have a question in the back of the room here.
Hi, Pat Munson. How do these principles guide what you collect and what materials you make available to patrons?
Well, we collect materials on a wide variety of topics and all different points of view. So we make sure that when we develop collections on whatever topic it might be, that we have different viewpoints that are there. So that's an important value of public library service. It's an important value in terms of how we develop our collections. And in fact, all libraries have something that, a policy that guides the selection of materials for our collections to ensure that that happens. And so it's all laid out that is core to how we develop our collections. And it's fundamental to the library profession as well. As professional librarians, we are committed to intellectual freedom and collections that represent all different points of view.
We have one question over here.
Hi, Vickery. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. It was really enlightening, and I'm glad these students were able to hear it.
That's great.
I just have, I don't know if I'll be able to articulate it, but the one thing that I always run up against in terms of discussions around intellectual freedom is the other side, which is the social responsibility side.
Right.
And I note that you didn't, I can infer it from what you said, but I'm wondering, so for instance, I mean, it's difficult, right, to stand up for marginalized communities, racialized communities, and so on. Or to fight for them. This is just to open it. What does that challenge look like when you're fighting to prevent certain speech that could be construed as hate speech? Or I don't know enough about Murphy's messaging, but it's the social responsibility piece that always gets me thinking.
Well, first of all, I just want to make it clear that Megan Murphy's speech did not contain hate speech. If she had her views are very well known. She spoke at Vancouver Public Library on the same topic, and it was on YouTube. It is on YouTube. Our event is on YouTube if anyone wants to watch it. She would have been charged with hate speech if she had engaged in hate speech. And there's a very high bar for hate speech in this country. And the reason there's a high bar is to allow free speech to thrive and to flourish. In terms of social responsibility, I will tell you that I consider myself a social justice warrior. I've been a librarian for over 30 years, and that's my passion for librarianship is my commitment to equity and inclusion and to the marginalized communities. And you support those communities by supporting intellectual freedom and free speech, because it's those voices that are so often being shut down. It's their voices. I mean, libraries have been supporting the LGBTQ community for decades, far before there were changes to laws or there were changes in terms of how people viewed the LGBTQ community. So and the same for racialized communities and for newcomers, for immigrants to this country. We work very hard at the library to serve everyone in the community, but especially those who need a helping hand to be successful in the world today. So I believe they're mutually reinforcing principles. I don't believe for a moment they're at odds with each other. And I believe that when I stand up for free speech, allowing Megan Murphy, I'm standing up for the transgender community and the LGBTQ community, because I'm making sure that voices are not being shut down. And it's those voices that often could be shut down from those in powerful positions. You can see, that's why I mentioned Missouri and Tennessee legislatures. That's what's happening there. They're trying to shut down content that includes the LGBTQ community in the content, either programming or in the collections.
Hear, hear. Vickery Bulls, everybody. I'm going to invite MJ Perry up to offer proper appreciation.
Way back in the 1800s, before Confederation and before public libraries, there was a journalist named Joseph Howe who wrote an article in his newspaper that was critical of the government of Nova Scotia. He was summarily charged with sedition, even though everything he wrote was true, because that was the law in those days. And he went to court, and it was the first case in Canada about freedom of speech, and the jury found in favor of Howe, which is why, if we wish to, which I'm sure none of us want to, we are allowed to criticize our governments. We have freedom of speech because of people like him. And in 1872, John A. Macdonald gave freedom of speech to the Typographical Union, so that when they said we are not being treated fairly, it was no longer considered sedition. We are very fortunate to have something like the Toronto Public Library System and library systems throughout North America, which ensure that we do have freedom of speech. Without it, I probably wouldn't be allowed to vote. Without freedom of speech, there probably would not be rights for gay, transgendered, lesbian communities in this country. Without freedom of speech, there probably would not be rights for students to say some of the things they do, and for faculty as well. The library is a place that welcomes and embraces everyone. And one of the most important freedom of speech elements I saw was when I was visiting the library at City Hall one day, and I happened to be sitting beside a homeless man who was reading the paper for the day just to keep warm. And I don't know why we struck up a conversation, but we did. And he said, I come in here because people listen to my opinions. I thought that was a wonderful example of equity of all people. I, for one, and I think all of us, are very grateful that we have this little corner of our society that protects our thoughts, and our ability to say them and work them through and engage with those who disagree with them and try and find resolution. I think we are very grateful that we have people who defend those rights. Thank you very much, Vickery, for a wonderful speech and for being there.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, everybody. I encourage you to look at our website. We do have other events coming up. Tomorrow we host the Finance Minister for the Province of Ontario. We have an event soon on Wednesday about seniors in society today. Other ones coming up. On our best days, we stand up for the same things that Vickery Bulls does. So thanks for coming out. This meeting is adjourned.
Those things that don't happen, and so it's really important to have the conversations after, and it's just being respectful, having the empathy. I didn't write the blog that says, as a woman, you should have this type of emotional intelligence. I wrote the blog to talk about everyone can universally have emotional intelligence in the boardroom, and just being present, being respectful, and really being polite and minding your P's and Q's. Really, that's what it comes down to. I used examples of one case where I had a board member fall asleep in the boardroom. Has anyone ever had that happen to you? And what do? You want to be respectful. You don't want this person to be embarrassed. So we were like, oh, the corporate secretary and I are kind of looking at each other like, what do we do? So he got up, tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, I think, you might need a coffee. But he never knew that he had fallen asleep. And so, I would hope if I fell asleep in a boardroom, someone might do the same to me. So that's one example of just being polite and being respectful. As you said, everyone comes from different backgrounds, different experiences, and that whole collective diversity of thought around the boardroom is so important. So you have to respect each and everyone's different viewpoints, because that's what makes it a rich conversation. And so being emotionally intelligent is you should do that each and every day of your life. I know for me, I need to listen better, so I work on that, and that's really important to bring that in. And so if anyone can take that away, emotional intelligence in the boardroom, you can check it on deborahrossati.ca or Women Get On Board. And it was just really to be mindful in everything you do when you are in the boardroom. It's no different than any other, whether it's a locker room or whether it's social etiquette somewhere else. It's just be respectful.
What are your effective forms of leadership?
I would say a lot of talk about EQ, but I talk about AQ and adaptability. Right now, with all the change in the world, it is so hard to keep up. And if you think about technological change, process change, systems change, just what's happening with this virus right now, like everything is uprooted. And so how do you cope? And so you have to have some frameworks to understand how can I adapt in this fast-paced world. So I think whereas EQ is about being self-aware and it's about having empathy, I think that'll get you so far. But we have to somehow find out how we're actually going to survive in this new world. And so for me, it's a lot of listening. I think that's an exceptional point. Is that you do most of your learning when you're listening. The other thing is really trying to understand the why, like how did we get here? And then back again to technology, we'll have systems go down. We always go to root cause, like get the system back up, but then from a root cause perspective, why did it happen? If you think about fire prevention, it's about getting to the root of it and making sure that you don't have the scenario continue, because that's how you get stronger. So for me, I think a great leadership skill is to read the room, understand, and then also be able to pivot and embrace those changes. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I guess I lead through purpose. So I'm very much about purpose-driven leadership, and I think it's so important that we explain the why to our people, and also translates to how I hire. So I always talk about this because I hire on a 2x2, so if you can bear with me, this is the only chart that you'll have in the air, but the y-axis is meritocracy, capability, and impact. But the x-axis is what I call the X factor, and that's values and mindset. And the reason why I know this is because we get 3 million applications a year at Google, and so IQ is a dime a dozen. And so I really look for people that have a sense of purpose, a sense of gratitude, a sense of empathy, people that are strong collaborators, because that's how you build high-performing teams, and you build something greater than yourself. So that's how I lead, I guess.
There's lots of talk about gender equality, kind of like the finish line, right? And then gender equity, which is the starting line. How do you build proper gender equity for the next generation to come?
Go ahead. Oh, well,
Sorry, guys.
Well, I think about it. I think I have granddaughters, and I think about where they are today versus where my sons were, and I just think they can be whatever they want, and that equity and be treated respectfully, and equality. I think equity is about that fair treatment to everyone. Whether it's culture, diverse, gender, whatever it might be. And I think it's just being, compassionate human beings, right? Like we all have to have respect for each other, and that equity comes from that place of everyone deserves a seat at the table, and everyone deserves to be treated respectfully. So that's mine, and I think about my granddaughters. I think that, I hope they're not having these conversations that we're having today 20 years from now, 30 years from now. And so if we can all come to a gentler and kinder place, and I know it's #each for equal, which is really talking about inclusivity and collective individual actions, we can be stronger for it.
Yeah, I just kind of build on that. I think there's so much that we can do within our realm of control. And I've been reading a great book called Atomic Habits.
I'm now reading that
now
book.
You are, no,
Thanks a
Kayla is
lot.
now reading it. It's a shameful plug, but it's an amazing book because it talks about getting 1% better every day. And the premise is that if each one of us got 1% better, we would be 37x times better by the end of the year because of compounding interest. Is that amazing? 1.01 to the 365 for all the math nerds in the room. Sorry.
And I'm like,
Point
what?
But it's amazing because I think that sometimes it feels so daunting and so big. And not all of us are in Claudette's or Deborah's position, for example, but each one of us has that opportunity to make somebody's life 1% better, contribute to advancing society 1% better. And if each one of us did, imagine where the world would be.
Yeah. And Claudette, I mean, a lot of it has to do with if you are or you come from a place of, say, privilege, or you have resources available, it's creating space. And maybe just having rooms where people just starting out can kind of just be in those rooms and get in front of people. If you could give any advice for anyone looking to do that, what would you do?
Yeah, I think I want to touch on one thing really quickly, just policy. And that as much as you have passion for things, if the policy doesn't change, then the world doesn't change.
Right.
So I think for those of you who are interested in the non-sexy jobs, like honestly, policy is so critical that we understand those foundational elements. To your question on getting in the room, reaching out, there are amazing associations. Like just think about the Empire Club and that it brought all of us together, and what can happen when you bring minds together. We don't all have to think alike, but when you put the force of all of us together, great things can happen. So I'd love to see rooms like this and other rooms. I had my Arts and Innovation Expo. We had 1,000 students turn up looking for jobs. Google was there, IBM was there, BMO was there, CIBC was there, TD was there, Dell, Bell, Rogers. Everybody came because they want to help youth get employed. So North Star, what's the reason? What's person, moon. When you have the mission and the mission is clear, then we forget logos. And so I think just opening up as many rooms as possible, putting aside the things that make us competitive, and really just focusing on the things that move us forward as humanity.
Absolutely. So we have Humber students here as well, as I mentioned before, but we also have maybe just people like myself just interested. Like, when am I ever going to get this chance to be around just such incredible women all the time, right? I stole you guys for what, an hour now? If you could give any advice to anyone listening right now, trying to get in maybe positions close to yours or your positions, what would it be? Ooh, silence.
Big, deep thought.
I'm happy to share at the start, is that I think there's something that holds us back from everything that we want to do, and that thing is fear. We don't want to be embarrassed. We don't want to look like we're not the brightest. We don't want people to think poorly of us, and we block our blessings because of fear. So what I always say to people, if you've been in any room that I spoke, I take that word fear and I ask you to reframe it. Because some of us look at it and we think it means forget everything and run, right? And
forget everything and run.
FEAR, forget everything and run. And the reframe is to say, face everything and rise. So take that word, flip it, and you'll see changes.
Face everything and rise. Natasha?
It's a hard one to follow. So I guess my advice for just the students is if you can't major in computer science, minor in it. Because
yes.
And I have nothing else to say. No, I haven't. But it's true, because computing science will change every profession, and it's going to change the world. And I think we need more people, and women especially, getting into STEM professions. And then I've asked to share a couple of other thoughts is know your story, because it's really important, because you can't define your future without knowing your past. And then the last thing is just prime your mindset, because it's how you show up in the world. And it's really important. All of us are so worried about what radio station we're playing in the car. What is the soundtrack you're playing in your mind? And what are you telling yourself every day? Thank you, table 3.
Ooh, yeah.
Table 3, I love you.
Wasn't expecting all this on a Monday. Deborah?
Wow. What a hard act to follow. I would say I've been thinking about this, and I would say for me is be curious and have a lifelong learning. My friend and I were having a conversation yesterday. I don't know which podcast it was. She said that there's different mindsets, and one of them is to be a learn-it-all versus being a know-it-all. Yeah. And I'd rather be a learn-it-all than a know-it-all. And sometimes you show up and somebody really is proving that they're the know-it-all and the smartest person in the room. And you know what? I know people in this room are smarter than I am, so I want to learn and grow from them. And I never get defined by a stage or age of where I am in my career, because it is lifelong learning.
Amazing. I can't even follow up that with any of my own questions, so I'm going to flip it to everybody here. If you have any questions, we would love to hear them from you. Oh, do we have a question? Dun, 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 dun.
I'll go first. Really quickly, for the brave few souls in the room, the men, the leaders, the male leaders in the room, what advice do you have on a day like today, you know, to further kind of all the messages that you're putting forward around inclusion and diversity and women, you know, the sponsorship and all that? What message or advice would you like to leave for them?
So I've been so blessed in my career. I've had so many men that have opened doors for me. And if they didn't open those doors for me, I wouldn't have the career I have today. And so that original, you know, mentor that I had when I was struggling in math, he was male. And he happened to be a math professor and tutored me for a year for free. And he encouraged me to go into computer science. And then along the journey, because I was always in very male-dominated industries, I had so many men open the door for me and give me that opportunity to be in the consideration set. And so my ask of you is, you are sitting around tables sometimes that many of us aren't, or women are not at, and you have the opportunity to ask the right questions and open those doors, and you have no idea the compounding impact that you can have on on the next generation by doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one, thank you for your allyship, because it is about allies, and I think that's really important. And I ask you also to think about the world today and some of the challenges that you have when men and women are working together. And I've heard some men say, I'm not going to sponsor women, I'm not going to mentor women because I just don't want to be in this position where things get taken out of context. I think when you have a respectful relationship and it's really focused on helping each other, because in a sponsorship relationship, you are helping each other, don't shy away from that. You know who you are, you know the value you bring. You can have very healthy relationships with women and help them with their career just like you can with a man.
Yeah, and I think the community to me, as I'm with Women Get on Board, is we're building community of women and men, because if 80% of boardrooms are made up of men, we need the men around the table thinking about, you know, that collective bigger community. And for me, most of my career, my male mentors have been males. My sponsors have been males. I wouldn't necessarily be here without the influence of my father, my brother. Of course, my mother was instrumental. I didn't want to go without mentioning her, but to me, I don't show up at a table and say, hey, I'm a woman, I need to be treated differently. I show up at the table because I am a professional and I know I'm going to contribute and I'm going to work really hard. And I don't want to be treated any differently. And FYI, I used to be in venture capital and all the decisions were made in the men's bathroom, so I would just follow them into the men's bathroom to make those decisions.
Amen.
So go where they are.
Yes, and it's also remembering, you know, you giving us a seat doesn't take away your seat.
Yeah.
I promise you there's room for us all.
Yeah.
Any other questions in the room?
There's one over
Oh, there's one. Oh, wait, we'll come to you in a sec. Yep. Hi, can you say your name?
Hi, Samantha.
Hi, Samantha.
Hi. So I hear a lot of being present, being respectful, and completely 100% agree with that. And I know in the age of technology that we're in, especially if we work in technology companies, in the boardrooms, in meetings, I find that there's a lot where technology is brought into that boardroom, and it interferes in what's happening within the boardroom. How do you address things like that? Like, I know that it's leading by example, but even if you bring your phone in and place it face down, it's not going to make the biggest of differences. Do you find that a challenge?
I'll speak to that. I'm probably, you know, there's a digital divide here, but I did grow up in the technology sector. But what I would say is I think leading by example, and you know, it's a cultural thing, and I think that if people, you know, if you're in the room and you're being present, then, you know, putting your phone away, putting it on silent, you know, like we're here, people don't have their phones out, right? They know it's protocol. You know, you're not necessarily going to engage in a conversation on your phone when you're in a 200-plus room. So I think it's leading by example and showcasing that, because you can't be ever present and in the room if you're busy. And there are distractions, and sometimes respectfully, you might say, listen, I've got it. I'm going to have to step out. I've got this call. I have to do that. And you inform that. But I mean, you go to meetings. I don't know how many people go out for dinner and they see everyone else on their mobile phones, on their iPhones or on their smartphones, and you're thinking, how could you possibly engage in a conversation over dinner? And so I think, I think we have to kind of go back to basics. I didn't grow up with an iPhone on my hip, and so there's some traditions, and we were talking about Empire Club being a tradition, and I think we do need to bring back some of those traditions, and hopefully that would create less of a technology, nuance in rooms and meetings.
The only thing I would add is that as we work in a different way, I had a leader and they were like, what are you all doing on your devices? And we're taking notes. Because that's the way we work. So we have to make sure that we calibrate when it's work and when it's not. So we can't assume that everyone is playing some game, when really that's just a new way of working. And so there has to be some kind of new contract that you establish. But I can certainly say, out with family and friends, there's policies that they make sense for your family or they make sense for your group. I went to see, somebody in government, there's a box. Everybody locks their phone before they go into the meeting room. That's a policy that they had.
That's great.
Right? Yeah.
How many people think they could survive that? Natasha.
Yeah, so at Google, we have this concept called JOMO, the joy of missing out. And we're trying to design our products to help you miss out on tech. Because so much of life happens in the present. And so even my own self, when I'm having one-on-ones, I just try and be really present. And it always amazes me how time seems to stand still when you're actually truly present with somebody. And so I try and do that. It's always a work in progress. And when I get home, I try and put my phone really far away from me so that I can spend time with my daughter and be with her. It's always a work in progress, so when you're in tech, let's get real. But
We're trying. Question over here.
I'd just like to say I'm also writing notes. So I have a bunch of questions, but I'll limit it to one.
Sorry, your name?
My name is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
And so I think there was a conversation around mentorship and advocacy. And I wonder if you all could differentiate between the two for me. And also, when you have a mentor and or an advocate, how do you evaluate whether they are operating or advocating for your individual benefit versus, if I could be direct, maybe self-interest on their part?
Yes.
How do you evaluate that? And then again, the differentiation between mentorship and advocacy.
So let's talk first then. First question is the difference between mentorship and advocacy.
Yeah, I always say that the mentor talks with you and the sponsor or the advocate talks for you, like on your behalf, about you, right? So I think it's important to know that they are there advocating for you when you're not at the table. I don't know if there's anything you guys would like to add.
Well said. A sponsor speaks about you when you're not there, and a mentor advises you. And I would say one of the benefits you get of being a mentor is, I call it reverse mentoring, because you learn from your mentee, right? And so I think everyone should have an opportunity to be a mentor and to be a mentee. And I always think about is that you want to create that next generation of, whether it's young entrepreneurs, next generation of minors in computer science, next generation of women around the boardroom table, is like, you do always want to create that. And so having that reverse mentoring is so, so important.
Yeah.
Thanks. And did we answer your second question?
And the self-interest one? I think
Yes,
that's
self-interest.
Yeah, I think that's
It's a very important question, just kind of when you're looking for a mentor, and sometimes they're, people are self-serving, let's be honest about that, and you kind of want to differentiate if it's authentic, right? If it's authentic guidance. Is that the question? For them.
Yeah, what I've discovered,
their vision board.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
What I've discovered is that who you partner with, it truly is a partnership. So asking 10 people to be your mentor and you don't know anything about them doesn't make sense. It has to be someone that you have a relationship with, and it happens over time, and they have to know about you. So I had an employer who gave me this amazing gift of going anywhere I want to go in the world, but at that point in my life, I was actually afraid to fly. So I didn't need that plane ticket, but I would have loved the spa, right? So if we had conversation about what drives Claudette at that period of time, then they probably would have given me something that was more aligned. The person that you're working with, they have to know you, right? And so it's as much as it's you a mentor picking you, it's you also picking the mentor.
And not being afraid to be clear with your intention.
Can I add to that, if that's okay? So I think for the sponsorship part, it's are you consulted or not? So I remember early in my career at Google, I had a more senior job opportunity, and my manager at the time didn't let me know, but declined on my behalf. And I was like, that's not great, right? I would have loved to have, could we have had the conversation? And so that felt like more self-interest because they knew that I would leave the team. And after that, though, a lot of the sponsors I had would ask me,
Right.
hey, I've got this great job opportunity. And yeah, there was some self-interest there, but we had the conversation and I felt part of the process. And that's how I knew that they were on my side. So anybody that makes a decision on your behalf, unless it's a really good one that you wanted, may be operating in self-interest. And it's good to know that. That told me volumes about that manager.
Right. Amazing. Well, with that, I just want to say, sorry. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I appreciate this. I would kill myself if I didn't ask the question. Well, I wouldn't kill myself. I'd be upset. My name's Nkechi Nwafor-Robinson. And so we hear a lot about there's still work to do. We're taking steps. We're moving things along. And I think there's a difference between that and making decisions. And I think in some big corps, there's some decisions that are not being made. And it's almost a two-part, but we could do one part in the interest of time. It's what do you think are some of the decisions that some of the key players are not making that they need to start making? And the second part would have been, how do you know when a corporation is just actually exhausted? They're talking a good game, but they're actually not going to make that much change.
Okay. I can address the second one. I always think it's a meritocracy, and if you're in an environment where the color of your skin, your gender, your orientation matter, you need to run far, far, far away, because that is not worth it. It will frustrate you, you will never achieve your highest potential, and it is not worth it to you long term. And I understand sometimes it's personal circumstance that can make you feel trapped, but honestly, network and get out of it. I've been so blessed to be in a meritocratic environment where I put in the time and energy and hard work, and that work would always show. Like I had a manager tell me once, be so good that they can't ignore you, but that only works in a meritocratic environment. So I think that's really important.
I agree.
What she said.
All right. On that note, honestly, guys, thank you so much for listening to these wonderful ladies. And thank you, ladies, so much for taking the time to share your blueprint, to share your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All shaking hands. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, ladies. We could have gone on for another hour. Just to provide some closing and sponsor appreciation remarks, I would like to call up Evelyn Bailey, Global Managing Director at IBM.
Thank you, Farah. The exciting thing is that for a group of amazing individuals that all of you are, there never is a last word. But if I could take this chance, I'd like to thank Kelly and the Empire Club on behalf of IBM. IBM has been around for over 100 years, as has the Empire Club. And it is a company that I'm very proud to be part of. As we were talking over lunch, it's almost 33 years. I started when I wasn't a teenager, younger than a teenager. IBM has been at the forefront over those 100 years, both as an employer of women, but also empowering women. I can tell you stories about challenging Japanese executives about what their position is for their daughters and not having any women in a room. And then all of a sudden at dinner, guess who showed up? So you have to take that stance of challenge. Advancement of women has been a key priority. I'm one of the top 300 executives in the world. Meritocracy's been a part of it. I don't ever want to be considered to be at the table because I'm a number or a statistic, and that is something that we all have to aspire, those around us. I'm excited about the tech reentry program that we sponsor to help women and other people get back into the workforce. The fact that we've opened up our first P-Tech school in Canada, which is a 6-year high school diploma to get people into the workforce who would not necessarily have college or university capability. And we've been part of STEM for Girls since the late 1990s. It's about being equal, and it is important to have a seat at the table. We are blessed. I just want to pause and say that, Doesn't matter what's going on in the world, but for who we are living in the city and the country that we are blessed. Each one of us has a role to play. I remember meeting with my grade 2 teacher for my daughter. I was a single mom. She lost her dad to cancer before she was 2. And that teacher said to me, I'm not going to pick her to answer the question all the time, so maybe you should tell her to put her hand down. This is like 2003, 2004. I said to her, with all due respect, it was a female, with all due respect, is she being disruptive? No. Is she being difficult with the other kids in the class? She said no. I said, well then with respect, I'm sorry, I'm not having that conversation. I mentor women in the workplace trying to give them their voices back. We've talked about many things. For those of you who haven't seen the movie Hidden Figures, even those of you who have, go back and watch that again. There were women in that movie at a time in the world that took a stand. And we talk about Northern Star, we talk about man and the moon. Women had a voice then. And so as we reflect and go into the workforce again today or back home or wherever you're going, I want to pause and I want to celebrate you. On behalf of the Empire Club, Kelly, Deborah, Claudette, Natasha, Kyla from hosting, let us think about those who've laid the path before us. Grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles. It takes a village. My daughter has a village and I am proud of that village because that's what's going to take, and that's the people who laid the path before us. To you in the room, my colleagues, my peers, let's continue to break glass, and as I say to my team at work, make those elephants dance. And then to the world that we're creating, for those that we hold the future for, let us be responsible. Let us know that there's a choice, a decision, a word that can be made with every tick of the clock, and are you making those ticks of the clock count? So on behalf of IBM, I want to thank the Empire Club. I want to thank each and every one of you as we celebrate the International Women's Day and the fact that we are so blessed in Canada for what that is and who we are in the world. Thank you.
Well, I have to close this out, but I don't want to. I'm not sure that's happened to me before. No, I really want to thank everybody for being a part of that. I am sure our speakers would be happy to answer any questions after this, as I know there were still some hands going up, those hands we want to see asking questions. And I want to thank you again for being here today, and thank you for those excellent remarks on behalf of IBM. Before we close, I just want to highlight a couple of other events that the Empire Club of Canada is hosting this week. Tomorrow we host the Minister of Finance for the province of Ontario, the Honourable Rod Phillips, who will be delivering an update ahead of the provincial budget. And on Wednesday, March 11th, we are having a very important discussion about the role of retirement communities in the fabric of all of our lives. And that's called Putting Seniors First, and that's going to have a really interesting panel of people coming together from that particular industry and sector. Thank you again for joining us. The meeting is now adjourned.